Welcome to this week's session on strategic planning. What we're looking at this week, of course, is as well as to get you to use the idea of running the public sector, we're also looking at actually getting you to understand the ethos of the course, what it is we're trying to argue for. Because this is a combative course, it's a course that actually has an aim, which is into changing perhaps the way strategic planning is looked at. So what we're going to do today is going to examine something called Homo strategicus, and that is effectively it means the strategic man, the strategic person. And it's an image that's been portrayed perhaps through the development of the MBA program and this idea of the MBA educated strategy person, the leader, strategic leader. And as I've already pointed out, some criticisms of the way this does, and in putting forward the example of the American War in Vietnam in the past section, we saw how this idea of Homo strategicus was measuring the wrong things and doing the wrong things, and going up against a more flexible, more reflective opponent, an opponent who was more realistic about their aims and their abilities, it proved to be a disaster. We also want to look at the idea of groupthink. We have already talked about this, so this session just reinforces what we talked about in the last thing, and explain why we are trying to look at a more diverse approach. And so we'll look into that, we'll explain the diverse thinking, the importance of diverse thinking. And finally, we want to discuss and appraise the ideas of reflection. So I want you to listen into this video about what we talk about reflection, and then later on, perhaps we can sit down in the sessions and we can actually discuss what this means. So Homo strategicus, middle-aged, middle-class male MBA. This was about the idea of it there. And these are the people who are supposedly born to lead. That's what the ideas were brought forward. And most of strategic teaching tends to be about how to create someone who fits into this model, who has this sort of qualification, who is capable of taking the way forward, and who is what's seen as the natural leader. I would just say there's an element of truth about this, because if you actually look at society as a whole, that's what you see holding these positions. And although they are not all male, there are quite a lot of females like this now. That is also not true. There's a majority male, and there are many, many societies and cultures, unlike the Western, in which there's still mostly male leadership. The question is, of course, that these people are produced by the education system, but are they actually using their education once they actually get inside the universities? What we're actually talking about here is that the MBA, rather than being a useful tool, or the strategy taught through the MBA, rather than being a useful tool so that they continue to use and develop as they go through their courses, it's actually, go for their careers, it's actually just something that it's a ticket to ride, if you like. It's a pass to open the door, rather than it being fundamentally something that's part of what they should or should not be doing. So do they implement Port on a daily basis? Do they discuss Mintzberg in their office? Have they got a copy of Grant open on their desk whenever they make their planning? Of course, they probably would not do, because of Grant himself is the source of many of the arguments regarding the MBA, the failure of the MBA, the failure of the case approach. So are we just really talking about education as a rite of passage? Are we talking about methods that actually work and actually are therefore adopted in the workplace? And if we are doing, how do they actually stay fresh? I mean, is it true that the strategy of 20 years ago when they graduated is still the strategy of today? Surely things have changed. I mean, I first became interested in this because I did my first strategy course 20 years ago, and I did another one about 10 years ago. And I felt, well, this hasn't changed very much, but my experience of the real world suggests to me that actually this isn't correct. The world has changed, so why are we not thinking separately? Why are we thinking differently? And therefore, I think it's important that we challenge this model of Homo strategicus. And it's also true to say that actually different organisations will have one education system, but some organisations have different rules for you to get involved. So some organisations expect you to read certain academic journals, others expect you to be members of certain societies, certain clubs, or certain organisations. So there may well actually be various institutes and things like that. So it's about how do you fit into the model of different organisations? How can one education system produce people that are suitable for so many different educations, so many different organisations? And of course, this brings us to the next big contradiction, the one that's very, very important to us and something that we should think about and discuss in class. There is a huge contradiction in strategy, because I'm sure that many of you watching this or listening to this tape, what you're actually interested in is becoming strategists, actually getting roles that allow you to actually implement strategy so you can take leadership positions, etc. But what we're teaching you maybe is to criticize those things. So will that help you get those positions? And the truth is actually, to become a strategist, you must learn and understand the American way, the European way, the MBA way, and you must be able to understand this. But to be a good strategist, you must be prepared to reject this position, to reject these models. So on one hand, we have to teach you the models, and on the other hand, we have to teach you to criticize those models. And that is that contradiction is at the heart of the strategy I'm going to be teaching you over the next 9-10 weeks. So I need you to be able to implement the models I will introduce you through a series of these video lectures. That's true. You need to be able to implement them because that is often the key to entry to the strategy, to becoming Homo Strategicus. We need you to perhaps look at them though and say, is Homo Strategicus really a role model? I want to educate you so you could be Homo Strategicus, but I want you to reject it as a role model. It's possibly something you can learn about, but it's not something you should really look to become. So learn to understand the models, but retain enough intellectual understanding to be able to use them but not be led by them. Because as I've made before, and I will repeat endlessly, and anyone who knows me knows that I say this all the time, all models are wrong, some models are useful. This is what's important for you. You must understand the process that we're going to undertake. As long as you can understand the process and use the process, you will be successful as strategists. So what do you need to be a successful strategist? I would say what you need is to be Homo reflectivus, the reflective human.